held its presidential elections, with many accusing its dictator, President Sisi, of holding sham elections in the light of massive human rights abuses, a clamping down on freedom of expression, and a consolidation of the security apparatus in the name of combating terrorism in the Sinai. Egypt, the Arab world's most populous and some would argue most strategically important state, has seen renewed support from the UK, the US, and competition among Western allies for arms deals as well as for private investment. In this video, we're going to be looking at 5 key areas of development that have happened under Sisi's first term, what to look forward to in his second term, and what Sisi's re-election will mean for Egyptian-UK relations as well as for the state of the whole region. First of all, we have to talk about UK involvement and support for the regime of President Sisi. Now, the former UK Prime Minister David Cameron had a meeting with President Sisi, welcoming him to the UK to discuss security and investment issues, especially seeing as Egypt is progressing with its campaign in the Sinai against ISIS and Al-Qaeda forces, and using that as a cover for crushing dissent at home and following through with an IMF programme in its domestic markets. But it's also important to understand the role that UK firms have had in terms of investment in Egypt post all the human rights abuses, especially when we consider that the relationship was given a boost in 2015 with the former Defence Secretary Michael Fallon going over to Cairo to discuss security arrangements and new arms deals. But also when we think about private investment, since 2016 we've seen investments of up to 30 billion in the Egyptian market. Also, post the Rabaa massacre, the most devastating and brutal crackdown that we've seen in Egypt, arguably in the Arab world until the Syrian civil war, there was a jump in UK exports from hundreds of thousands, a puny fee, to about $172 million worth of arms deals. The UK is complicit in the human rights abuses within Egypt perpetrated by the Sisi regime. The rise of President Sisi has been disastrous for democracy at all levels in Egypt. We've seen a withering of the free press, of activism, of dissident movements, of the rule of law, of also political party life, with his 2 major rivals during the recent presidential elections having to drop out of the race for various reasons, clearly pressure being put on them, or it's been made difficult for them to run as effective members of the opposition. And also when we look at his first 19 months in charge, there were 239 presidential decrees. Even political parties and coalitions that he's been able to form have been at the behest of the intelligence agencies, with the intelligence agencies and security services moving behind the scenes to cajole parliamentary coalitions and majorities in favour of Sisi in the legislature. Sisi's rule has seen an even more intense level of crackdown on democracy, freedom of expression and dissident movements than during the Mubarak era. 60,000 plus people have been detained under counterterrorism laws. In fact, the 2015 counterterrorism law made it illegal for journalists to even report stats which are counter to national security interests. This is especially pertinent when we think about Egypt's campaign in the Sinai, but also the effect that it has on domestic dialogue and the crushing of dissent. The next issue probably has more to do with the geopolitical situation in terms of Egypt being closer to Saudi Arabia and the regional rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and how both forces are contributing to a rise of sectarianism across the wider Arab world and West Asia. Now, in Egypt, there have been a rise in sectarian attacks, especially against Coptic Christians, but also anti-Shia attacks. Sectarian attacks have been registered at 363 attacks this year, with over 400 people being killed as a result of sectarian bombings. Now, despite the IMF suggesting to Egypt that their next budget should invest heavily in health and education, what we're seeing in the Egyptian economy is an Egyptian economy which makes it incredibly hard for small and middle-sized businesses to grow, or there to be any degree of independent growth away from political parties and the army. Small private businesses consistently have to compete against huge conglomerates or middle-sized businesses that are subsidized and have substantial links to big military men or military units. This is going to be a real problem in terms of Egypt being able to deal with the weakening of civil society, but also an epidemic of corruption. Whether it's the Rabba massacre in Egypt, where security services gunned down over 1,000 people protesting peacefully, or the continued massacre of civilians in Yemen, Western politicians often cite Iran as the main source of instability in the region, or its proxies, allies such as Hezbollah. But what we're seeing is Arab states incapable of having political elites which are receptive to democracy, respecting human rights, and also dealing with corruption, being able to create effective public sectors, as well as small mid-sized businesses that have private investment that can help the people. Western politicians are accountable for their continued support for the most despotic Arab regimes. What we're seeing is international law, we're seeing the Western media, the entire power structure of the West, which allows for Arab dictators to use the spectre of terrorism as continued justification for a model which has failed all people in West Asia and the Arab world. It's time to hold people like President Sisi to account.